Hello everyone, I've been asked to talk about business and wider system. My name is Jemma Hynes, I'm the CEO of FoodSync. We're based in Stockport, but got offices about 10 minutes walk from here as well. I'm going to talk a little bit around what do we think about with regards to the challenges when we engage with business, and how do we look at some of the solutions and ideas to transforming the food system for health and sustainability. So a little bit about what we do. We are a facilitation organisation. We do a lot of localised development around the food system. We're predominantly based, I work in the north, but we do a little around London and around the rest of the UK. We fill in the gaps basically. So we look for opportunities, whether they be assets, individual organisations like local authorities looking to push forward the food agenda. At the time when people will come to us with one component and say, right, we want to try and tackle the changing nature of Manchester's town centre and city centre. With retail's dying, how do we look to plug those gaps? What do we put in there? I know, let's put a restaurant in there. Everyone's diving forward on food and beverage, and we will look to try and create an integrated strategy that we don't then saturate the market and cause unintended consequences. So basically these icons just represent the gaps that we fill, but every time we look at a solution to a problem, we focus predominantly on the economics, because we find that we don't tackle the economics first, that ultimately the solution will fail. We look at the health impact, we look at the environment, so we try not to do any damage through what we do. We try and reduce, recycle, and in essence put supply chains in which are more environmentally sound. And then we look at how does that integrate with the communities. So if we're going to change the way our places work, how do we make sure that they work for the communities at large? So Riaz asked me to just look at a little bit around the Manchester context. So we were brought in to look at the food partnership for the city, Manchester Food Board. Largely it wasn't working. It had a lot of people engaged, but didn't really know why they were there and what they were going to do. So we were brought in as a strategic partner to look at both the food system requirements for the city and look to help ultimately develop a strategy that will work specifically for the area. So we've looked at the system, we've looked at the wider partners and the networks that run between them. We've looked at accountability. In essence, if people are doing activity and no one's held to account, then will they actually do anything that makes any lasting change? We're delivering value through engagement by working with everyone from housing right through to, we work with one of the landowners that owns about a third of the city. They're engaged in everything from looking at new leasing structures for all they've got around 300 million square foot in and around Manchester of retail and leisure space, and they're going to look to put improved sustainability clauses into all of their leases. So that's some of the ideas that we have around working in the city. We're trying to build social capital and impact through all of our engagement work, so passing that knowledge on, building knowledge, skills and resources through the work that we do. And we understand system levers and mechanisms for change, so what might be one person's problem could be another person's solution. And in essence, lots of times we're talking today about food being the problem. In many instances, food is the solution, and we've got to try and find them, and they're our levers for change. So these are some of Manchester's strategic priorities. I'm not big on putting loads of words on a slide, but it gives you some idea around what we felt were the commonalities across the city. This very much follows a lot of the Sustainable Food Cities approach, which a lot of you will be familiar with, but it is based on an assets review within the city, what key actors in the city would like to achieve together, and it's built around that aspect. Number 8 for us is the most exciting, because there is a lot of support around innovation to look at sustainable production and largely looking at disruptive technologies. We don't have a hub in the north around food tech, and we're even not very good at defining it. So we started to work with some key partners around what that looks like, and that gives rise to some ideas moving forward to help tackle the challenge. So the challenge around this area, particularly in the north, is around our inequalities. So we've talked a lot about that already today. So the difference between those that have and those that have not. We've got 1 in 10 people in Greater Manchester, 1 in 10 children that don't have enough to eat. And we've got a lot of work to do to try and tackle that, but also do that in an economically sustainable fashion. So Local authorities don't have any money, and whose problem is it? And people keep porting it around. In essence, housing associations are filling those gaps, but short-term funding for short-term problems, and these aren't short-term problems at the moment. So whatever we do, we need to look at viability and long-term sustainability. We need to look at market forces and consumerism. If you stand and look out this window normally in Piccadilly Gardens, you normally see loads of Deliveroo and Uber Eats riders hurtling around town at this time, moving between the different fast food joints, because queuing up in a fast food site isn't quick enough, that we actually have to get people to deliver it for us as well. So how do we look at the changing demographic? Just a show of hands, how many of you are under the age of 40? Okay, so there's a lot of challenge really of understanding the needs of the millennials and the next generation. And some of the key disruptors that are working at the moment are saying that we're going to create leisure channels that work through YouTube, as we're already seeing, but you will be able to buy your food within a 10-minute period of seeing somebody eat it on one of these YouTube channels. It'll come through a dark kitchen that could have just set up 10 minutes before, and that will produce lots and lots of waste, because they'll try and forecast how many of the 750,000 people that have just watched it are going to actually order that product. And we then need to actually cope with the system that is going to be left to deal with that problem. So some of the knowledge and skills in these sectors, the people that work in food tech typically in the UK are ex-bankers. They're not food specialists. We have in our co-working space a company that started selling sex toys that now is an online e-commerce platform for food. And I asked them who were their technical manager and what do they do around that, and they looked at me very bluntly and they said, well, most of our food comes from abroad and is just put together in the UK. I'm sure somebody is doing their compliance, but it's not at the forefront of their development. So some of the things we work with, about 120 independent food and drink businesses at the moment. I've worked about 1,300 in total, most of which are SMEs. The cost of labour and commodities are the two single biggest worries at the moment. So Brexit obviously is an immediate challenge around labour, but we're finding that food is very poor paid traditionally. So how do we manage the changing nature of the cost of labour? So the difference between a cook in a care home and a general assistant now can be as low as 30 pence. The cook has to be skilled, qualified over a 3-year period. The general assistant probably won't even wash the pans, because such is the nature of the shortages of labour in that sector. So we need to help the industry innovate and move forward and use more skilled but more efficient practices. And we also need to help them to reduce the amount of commodities that they waste. Food price rises at the moment and the cost of labour are the two biggest challenges we experience in the food and beverage sector, and the two biggest concerns. So if you can design a solution that helps them in that way, you will build engagement. Some of the things that we notice, partners around this room that we know very well, there's some great initiatives happening, but to help them scale is a different story. What do they need? And then when we look at very large industrial players, how do they work in a more nimble and agile way? Food tech, lots of forums we sit on, says it works at 7 times the pace of the normal food industry development, which already shifts very quickly anyway. So how do we help the likes of M&S that wants to innovate but doesn't actually have a spend on food tech move forward? How do we then help Sainsbury's, who are actually buying shares into new development organisations, so that they've got a handle and some insight into what's going on? So the different strategies being employed by the large businesses are very difficult to understand and navigate. And then, like I say, so there's this element around scale. Sometimes you can be small and nimble, but also you can be too big and slow. Some of the other aspects we've talked about is behaviour. Not everyone wants to eat healthy, sustainable food. That's not necessarily their number one. But we can make it incredibly attractive if we use some of the marketing and development messages that are used by larger organisations. Media, I think this is just huge at the moment. The way that people are buying food, how they're influenced to purchase the food that they eat, and how they choose to spend most of their time needs to sort of play into that. We're looking at the moment around production and consumption. A lot of the work that we do is around shaping lifestyles and livelihoods. How do people live, and how do they earn their money, and how do we move forward? So as an organisation, I thought let's just explain a little bit about where we're spending our time. We've been around about 3.5 years as FoodSync, though I've been around in this sector for around, since I was born. I'm 5 generations of butchers, so old habits die hard. But we look at the macros, so we're working with urbanists, architecture practices, development organisations to basically shape the way that our towns and cities evolve. Death of high streets, 30% occupancy rates on high streets, things like that are key factors for urbanists to be retained by local authorities to say, how does our town look like? How do we shape putting more residential in town centres? Then how do we then shape amenity? What does that look like? And then we're then saying, well, how do people eat? Where are the jobs? You know, how does all this play through? A lot of what we do is around viability assessments. So somebody, give an example, in Rochdale's a 30,000 square foot disused market hall has been unoccupied for 5 years. What can we do with that space? We're seeing the development of food and beverage markets where food halls, you know, everyone wants a food hall in every town at the moment, but not every concept like that is viable. So we very much do an asset-based assessment as to what would work in that space, and we then look to help curate that space, bringing in the right partners. So system strategy development, because we're used to working with the economic sector, a lot of people aren't comfortable in that space. They don't necessarily want to work with developers, don't necessarily want to work with the large food service operators, but actually we'll sit and we'll play nicely with everyone around that table. So in the Manchester context, we have the NFU there, we have plant-based scientists, right through to CityCo, which is the business improvement district for the town. We've got major asset managers that sit around that table. So none of them are food specialists, but we've got a great partnership with food specialists around the city, and they come in issues relevant to them. So we're talking about food waste, we get the right people around the table to advise the partnership how to move forward. So for us, it's more about reach and influence, and then getting them the right information at the right time. But sometimes there's a gap. We were asked to go and review 11 care homes that were in a small group. Food service model was worth about 1.3 million, and they had concerns that the food wasn't very good. It was an external catering provider. What did they do? They weren't big players, so they didn't have massive procurement contracts, but they also weren't small enough to be that nimble either. So we did a food service review, and we've looked at 8 different eating occasions through the day, as typically happens in care homes, and very little food spend, but we've actually managed to change the food model, make it more sustainable, improve all the working conditions for the labour force, and make it more resilient, specifically with Brexit in mind. And that's the sort of thing that you need to sometimes be able to get into the micro, into the detail, to understand how these organisations operate, because if you can't do the detail, how do you look at the system? And so that's where we tend to, my board always gets really annoyed, because in 1 minute I'm saying, yeah, we might go and look and help that business out at their procurement, and they might only be buying, you know, 40 litres of milk a week, but then another client might be buying 400 litres of milk just in one home. So, you know, there's that sort of thing that you need to be able to look at all of the avenues. So our insight, I think you need to make a convincing case, particularly with business and local authorities, where there's diminishing resource. We need to make the money work harder. We need to have strategic engagement. We need to build things that work for different partners and co-produce that strategy to move forward. We need to understand the levers for change and how best to apply them. So where have we got that wiggle room? Where have we got those opportunities or problems which we could use different thinking to solve those issues? And moving beyond the hype into insight disruptive technologies. I was at an Insight and Innovation Day last week around food tech, and I go to a few of these because it's one of our contracts that we're involved in. And so many of those things was there. Somebody in Cheshire was doing IV nutrition for those too posh to eat. And this was brought through as a really, really good good project. And the 2 girls that were presenting, it was difficult not to be judgmental, because they both stood there with lip fillers that were so big that they struggled to talk. And we looked at that, and you got then next to another technology platform called Winnow that are providing an amazing food waste solutions. I don't know if any of you know Winnow, but Winnow uses artificial intelligence to predict what you might use. So in a place like this, where they would do a lot of buffet catering to get through the surge of people for breakfast, it actually works out what you're wasting and then uses artificial intelligence to actually formulate a response to help the chefs cook the right amount of products and buy the right amount of product. And that's been proved to be very effective. Some technologies are great, some are terrible. and what we need to do is back the right horses. So there's something in that it's not just about, you know, raising lots and lots of investment through venture capital. It's about what actually makes an impact. So innovation, knowledge transfer and application, and at pace. Some of the food technology companies, you know, they're rapidly innovating, and sometimes it's difficult to get the insight to them and the knowledge coming from academia. So sometimes I think we could look at something and it could take 2 years to develop, whereas they have 2 weeks sometimes, people innovating in their spare rooms. And so it's just something about making those timeframes fit for all the different partners and being impact driven. If we can all see the results of our action, then we're more keen to collaborate and move forward. Okay, that's it. Thanks.